At 20 years old, Aria Holloway had $62, a worn duffel bag, and a car that had just died on the shoulder of State Route 47. She had been homeless for 2 years. Since aging out of foster care, she had slept in shelters, borrowed couches, abandoned parking lots, and the back seats of vehicles that never belonged to her for long. Every place she stayed came with an expiration date. Every promise eventually ended. When her old Honda finally coughed, rattled, and died outside a town she had never heard of, Aria thought it was just one more thing being taken away. Then she wandered into a county surplus auction in the tiny farming town of Red Hollow. The auctioneer sold tractors, broken equipment, and parcels of unwanted land. Near the end of the auction, one property remained unsold, a collapsed municipal water tower sitting on a half-acre of weeds and rust. Nobody wanted it. The tower had fallen years ago. The land had become a joke. People laughed when the bidding opened at $5. Then, Aria raised her hand. $5 was almost all she had left. The crowd shook their heads. The auctioneer stared. But the gavel fell. The property was hers. 3 weeks later, while clearing rubble with a stray German shepherd she had rescued from inside the ruins, Aria discovered a sealed chamber hidden beneath the foundation. Inside waited a journal, photographs, savings bonds, and a letter addressed to someone carrying the Holloway name. The contents had been buried for more than 60 years, and they were waiting specifically for her. The Honda died at 4:17 in the afternoon. Aria remembered the exact time because she had stared at the dashboard clock while turning the key again and again, hoping the engine would somehow change its mind. It didn't. The car rolled onto the gravel shoulder and stopped. Silence filled the cab. Outside, cornfields stretched toward the horizon beneath a pale September sky. Aria rested her forehead against the steering wheel. "Come on," she whispered. Nothing happened. The check engine light glowed back at her like an insult. After a minute, she grabbed her duffel bag from the back seat and climbed out. Everything she owned fit inside that bag. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, a jacket, a blanket, a few photographs, and an old olive green sewing tin that had belonged to her grandmother, Mabel Whitlock. Mabel had raised her after her mother died. When Mabel passed away 6 years earlier, the sewing tin was the only thing Aria had refused to leave behind. The road sign ahead read, Red Hollow, 2 miles. Aria had never heard of it. But 2 miles sounded better than sitting beside a dead car. She started walking. By the time she reached town, the sun was hanging low over the grain silos. Red Hollow was small. One main street. A diner, a hardware store, a courthouse, a church. The kind of place where everybody probably knew everybody else. As Aria approached the courthouse parking lot, she heard a loud voice over a microphone. A crowd had gathered around a flatbed trailer, an auction. She drifted toward it without thinking. Watching cost nothing. The auctioneer was selling county surplus property, old tractors, abandoned trailers, unused equipment. The crowd bid enthusiastically. Then came the final listing. The auctioneer grinned. Last item of the day, half-acre parcel on Cedar Ridge Road, former municipal water tower site. Tower collapsed during the 2016 windstorm. Property sold as is. Starting bid, $5. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Nobody moved. The auctioneer waited. $5, folks. Silence. Going once? Aria looked down at the crumpled bills in her pocket. $57. That was all she had left. No home. No job. No working vehicle. Just $57. A half-acre of land sounded ridiculous, but it also sounded like somewhere nobody could tell her to leave. $5, she said. Every head turned. The auctioneer blinked. You bidding, miss? Yes. Any other bids? Nothing. Going once, going twice, sold. The gavel struck the trailer. Just like that, Aria Holloway became the owner of a collapsed water tower. The paperwork took 10 minutes. The county clerk, an older woman with silver glasses, handed her the deed. Cedar Ridge Road, she said. Follow the grain elevator east. You'll find it. Aria thanked her and began walking. The property appeared just before sunset. A rusted chain-link fence surrounded a field of weeds. Twisted steel beams lay scattered across the ground. The shattered water tank rested on its side like the skeleton of a giant. It was worse than she imagined, and somehow better, because it was hers. Aria stepped through the hanging gate and dropped her duffel bag near a concrete wall that still stood. Then she heard it. A low whimper. She froze. The sound came from inside the broken water tank. Carefully, she picked up a length of rusted metal and approached. Something moved inside the shadows. Two dark eyes stared back at her. A German shepherd. Thin. Dirty. One front leg injured. The dog watched her silently. Aria slowly lowered the metal rod. "Hey," she said softly. The dog didn't run, didn't growl, didn't move. Aria opened her bag and removed half a sandwich she had saved from lunch. She placed it on the ground, then stepped back. The dog waited. Finally, it limped forward and devoured the food. Its tail gave a single cautious wag. Aria smiled. "Well," she said, looking around at the ruins. "Looks like we both live here now." As darkness settled over the abandoned property, neither of them knew that beneath the cracked foundation of the fallen tower, a secret had been waiting more than 60 years to be found. And before long, the dog would be the one to find it first. The first night was colder than Aria expected. The September air carried the warning of approaching autumn, and by midnight, she was wrapped tightly in her blanket beneath the tarp she had stretched between two sections of broken concrete. The German shepherd stayed nearby, not close enough to touch, just close enough to watch. Every few minutes, Aria would wake and see him sitting near the fallen water tank, ears alert, scanning the darkness. It felt strangely comforting. For the first time in months, she wasn't completely alone. When dawn arrived, the dog was still there. Aria sat up and rubbed her eyes. The dog stood immediately. His tail moved once, a cautious greeting. "Morning," she said. The dog tilted his head. Aria laughed softly. "You need a name." The shepherd continued watching her. "You keep patrolling the place like you're guarding it." His ears perked. "Scout." The tail wagged again. "Scout it is." The name stuck. Over the next few days, survival became routine. Aria walked into town every morning. She filled water bottles at a public faucet behind the courthouse. She bought bread, peanut butter, and canned soup with her dwindling money. Then she returned to the property and worked. Work helped. Work always helped. When life became too heavy, Mabel Whitlock had taught her to use her hands. Fix something. Clean something. Build something. Movement kept despair from settling in. So Aria began clearing the lot. She dragged twisted steel beams into organized piles. She hauled chunks of concrete toward the fence. She cut weeds taller than her waist. Every evening she fell asleep exhausted. Every morning she started again. Scout followed her everywhere. Sometimes he disappeared into the surrounding fields for hours, but he always returned before dark. On the fourth morning, a pickup truck rolled through the open gate. Aria straightened immediately. The truck stopped. A woman climbed out. She looked to be in her late 60s. Short, silver hair, strong hands, work boots. The kind of person who looked more comfortable carrying lumber than sitting behind a desk. "You the girl who bought the tower lot?" the woman asked. Aria nodded. "Depends who's asking." The woman smiled. "Fair answer." She lifted a large water jug from the truck bed. "Evelyn Mercer," she extended her hand. "Owner of Mercer Hardware and Supply." Aria shook it. Evelyn Mercer? The only hardware store in town. Evelyn handed her the jug. "You've been hauling water from town for 4 days. Figured you could use this." Aria hesitated. Years in the foster system had taught her that gifts often came attached to invisible strings. Evelyn seemed to recognize the hesitation immediately. "It's just water," she said. "No catch." Aria accepted the jug. "Thank you." Evelyn looked around the property. The organized piles, the cleared pathways, the growing patches of exposed foundation. "You did all this yourself?" "Mostly." "And the dog?" "Scout helps." Scout sat beside Aria as if confirming the statement. Evelyn chuckled. "Good worker? Complains less than most people." That earned a genuine laugh. For the next several minutes, Evelyn wandered around the property, studying the progress. Finally, she stopped near the center of the lot. "The tower fell 8 years ago, she said. Nobody touched this place since. She looked back at Aria. Then you show up with nothing and start rebuilding it. I'm not rebuilding it. No? Aria shrugged. I'm just trying to make it livable. Evelyn's expression softened. Funny thing. What? Sometimes that's how rebuilding starts. Before leaving, Evelyn returned to her truck. She came back carrying a pair of heavy leather work gloves. Take these. I can't pay for them. I didn't ask you to. Aria stared at the gloves. Brand new. Good quality. The kind Mabel would have appreciated. Finally, she accepted them. Thank you. Evelyn nodded. Come by the store if you need something. Then she climbed into her truck and drove away. After she left, Aria slipped on the gloves. They fit perfectly. For the next 2 weeks, the work continued. The property slowly transformed. Beneath years of weeds and debris, the original foundation emerged, a massive circular concrete structure almost 30 feet across. The remains of the old tower's base. Scout spent every day wandering around it, sniffing, investigating, watching. Then, one morning, he started digging. At first, Aria ignored it. Dogs dug holes. That was normal. But Scout kept returning to the same exact location, again and again and again. By afternoon, he had excavated a shallow depression near the center of the foundation. Scout, the dog, kept digging. Seriously, dirt flew behind him. He whined softly. The sound caught Aria's attention. It wasn't playful. It was focused, intentional. She walked over and crouched beside him. Something felt different. The concrete beneath the dirt wasn't uniform. Aria brushed away loose soil with her gloved hand. A narrow seam appeared. Perfectly straight. Too straight to be accidental. Her heartbeat quickened. She followed the line with her fingers. It formed a rough square, almost like a hidden panel. Scout sat beside her and stared directly at it. Aria knocked lightly on the concrete. One section sounded solid. Another produced a hollow echo. She froze. Then knocked again. The same sound. Hollow. Beneath the foundation, beneath decades of rubble, there was empty space. Scout let out a low bark. Aria stared at the strange concrete seam. Somewhere underneath that foundation, something was waiting. And for the first time since arriving in Red Hollow, she felt the unmistakable thrill of discovering a secret no one else knew existed. Aria barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the square seam hidden in the foundation, a hollow space, a secret room. Something buried beneath the collapsed water tower. By sunrise, she was already walking toward Mercer Hardware and Supply. The bell above the door jingled as she entered. Evelyn Mercer looked up from a stack of invoices. Morning. I need a pry bar. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. That sounds promising. Aria explained what Scout had found. By the time she finished, Evelyn was no longer smiling. She was listening carefully. A hollow chamber? Evelyn asked. Maybe. And nobody knew it was there? Not that I can tell. Evelyn disappeared into the back room and returned carrying a heavy steel pry bar. Bring it back when you're done. Aria reached for her wallet. Evelyn shook her head. Not today. Within 20 minutes, Aria and Scout were back at the foundation. The morning air was cool and still. Scout immediately trotted to the square section and sat beside it, waiting, as if he already knew what came next. Aria inserted the pry bar into the narrow seam. She pushed. Nothing. She pushed harder. The old seal cracked with a sharp sound. A thin line opened. Her pulse jumped. The panel moved. Not much, but enough. For the next 2 hours, she worked steadily. The hidden slab was thick and incredibly heavy. Piece by piece, she loosened it. Sweat soaked her shirt. Her arms trembled from exhaustion. Finally, the concrete shifted enough to reveal darkness below. Aria stepped back. Scout barked once. The opening was roughly 4 feet across. A shaft descended into the earth. She grabbed a flashlight from her bag and shined it downward. Concrete walls, dry, smooth, deliberately constructed. The beam reached the bottom. There, resting in the center of the chamber floor, sat a wooden box wrapped in dark oilcloth. Aria stared. Someone had built this. Someone had hidden it. And somehow, It had survived decades underground. Carefully, she lowered herself into the chamber. The air smelled faintly of dust and stone. Her boots touched the floor. The box was smaller than she expected, about the size of a milk crate, but surprisingly heavy. She lifted it with both hands, then climbed back into the sunlight. Scout immediately began sniffing it. His tail wagged furiously. "Good work," Aria said. She sat cross-legged on the foundation. For a moment, she simply looked at the box. All her life, good surprises had been rare. Part of her expected disappointment. Another part was afraid to hope. Finally, she cut the brittle twine with her pocket knife. The oilcloth fell away. Beneath it sat a beautifully crafted walnut box. No lock. No markings. Just age. She lifted the lid. Inside were 4 items. A leather-bound journal. A bundle of photographs wrapped in wax paper. A stack of papers tied with a faded blue ribbon. And a sealed envelope. Aria reached for the envelope first. The paper had yellowed with age. The handwriting was neat and careful. She froze when she read the front. "To whoever carries the Holloway name forward." Her breath caught. Holloway. Her name. Slowly, she set the envelope down, then picked up the journal. The leather cover cracked softly as she opened it. The first page contained a date, April 18th, 1955. Beneath it were the words, "My name is Walter Holloway, and today I accepted the position of water commissioner for the town of Red Hollow." Aria blinked. Water commissioner. Red Hollow. The very town where she now sat. She turned another page. Walter described supervising crews, designing pipelines, planning the construction of a municipal water system. Every entry carried the voice of someone proud of his work, someone building something that mattered. Then she found a photograph. A young man stood beside a partially completed water tower. Dark hair, broad shoulders, a confident smile. Behind him rose the steel skeleton of the tower. The resemblance hit her instantly. The jawline, the eyes, the shape of the nose, features she had seen in mirrors her entire life. Her hands trembled. She looked back at the journal. Walter Holloway. She looked at the photograph again. The realization arrived slowly. Then, all at once, this wasn't just some forgotten engineer. This wasn't just a town employee. This man was family. She tore open the wax paper package. More photographs spilled out. Walter, standing beside a blonde woman. Walter, holding a baby. Walter, sitting on a porch with a little girl. The little girl couldn't have been older than 6. Dark hair, bright eyes, a gap-toothed smile. Aria felt her heart stop. She had seen that smile before, in the only childhood photograph she possessed of her mother, Nora Holloway. The little girl in the picture was Nora, her mother, which meant only one thing. Walter Holloway was her grandfather. Aria lowered the photograph slowly. For 20 years, she had believed her family history ended with loss. Her mother dead. Her grandmother gone. No roots. No past. No place she truly belonged. Yet here, buried beneath a collapsed water tower in a town she had never heard of, she had discovered proof that her story began long before she was born. The afternoon sun drifted across the foundation as she continued reading, page after page, entry after entry. At first, Walter's life seemed hopeful, optimistic, full of purpose. Then the tone changed. The handwriting grew sharper, angrier. The entries became darker. A new name appeared repeatedly. Roland Blackwood. Aria turned another page, then another. And by sunset, she understood something terrible. The man who built Red Hollow's water system hadn't left voluntarily. Someone had forced him out. And Walter had spent the rest of his life trying to recover what had been taken from him. At the bottom of one page, written in heavier ink than the rest, a single sentence stood alone. "If they take everything else, they will not take what I buried beneath this tower." Aria stared at the words. The mystery wasn't over. It was only beginning. The next morning, Aria carried the journal to the shaded side of the foundation and settled against a section of broken concrete. Scout lay beside her. The wooden box sat nearby, carefully covered with a tarp. She had no intention of leaving it unattended. Not anymore. The journal rested open in her lap. For the next several hours, she disappeared into Walter Holloway's life. The early entries were filled with purpose. Walter described surveying land around Red Hollow, digging trenches, installing pipelines, overseeing construction crews. Every page reflected pride, not arrogance. Pride. the kind that came from building something useful, something that lasted. Aria found herself smiling as she read. Walter loved the work. He wrote about water pressure calculations the way other people wrote about vacations. He celebrated every completed section of pipeline, every successful inspection, every family connected to clean water. One entry caught her attention. September 3rd, 1956. Today we opened the new water system. Children ran through the spray from the testing valves. Mrs. Fletcher cried when water finally came through her kitchen tap. I have never been prouder of anything in my life. Aria reread the line twice. She could almost hear the satisfaction behind the words. A few pages later, photographs appeared. Walter standing beside workers. Walter shaking hands with town officials. Walter smiling in front of the nearly completed tower. Then there were family photographs. His wife, Dorothy. His daughter, Nora. Picnics. Birthdays. Ordinary moments. The kind of moments people never realize will someday become priceless. Aria stared at a picture of Nora sitting on Walter's shoulders. The image hurt. Not because she remembered her mother, because she didn't. Most of her memories of Nora were fragments. A voice. A laugh. A scent. Nothing more. Yet here was proof that Nora had once been loved deeply, that she had belonged somewhere, that she had once been happy. The journal continued. For a while, everything went well. Then Roland Blackwood appeared. The name showed up casually at first. A businessman, a land buyer, a developer purchasing farmland east of town. Walter barely mentioned him. But over time, the entries changed. Roland wanted expansion, housing developments, commercial growth, new neighborhoods. None of that bothered Walter. What bothered him was Roland's interest in the water system. According to the journal, Roland wanted influence over the town's water rights, control over future access, control over development approvals, control over growth itself. Walter opposed him strongly. One journal entry read, "Roland says he wants to help the town. Maybe he even believes it. But a man who controls the water controls everything built afterward." The conflict intensified. Council meetings became arguments. Arguments became accusations. Soon rumors spread through Red Hollow. Questions appeared about missing funds, improper invoices, construction costs. Walter denied every allegation. An official audit followed. The results cleared him completely. Every dollar was accounted for. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing had been hidden. Yet the damage remained. People remembered accusations longer than corrections. Walter's frustration became visible in the handwriting. The letters grew sharper, darker, more forceful. March 1961. The council voted. His position disappeared. Officially, the town restructured the Water Commission. In reality, Walter lost his job. The role was recreated under a different title. A new administrator was appointed, one recommended by Roland Blackwood. Walter wrote only 3 sentences about the meeting. I built the system. I defended the system. Today, they handed it to someone else. Aria closed her eyes. Even 60 years later, she could feel the heartbreak. She understood it. Not the politics, the betrayal. The feeling of giving everything you had to something and watching it taken away. The final Red Hollow entries came quickly. Walter described packing his belongings, selling equipment, preparing to leave town. Then came the most important section, the chamber. Walter wrote about constructing it in secret, pouring reinforced concrete walls, waterproofing every surface, creating a hidden compartment beneath the tower foundation. He worked at night, alone. Nobody knew. Nobody suspected. Inside the chamber, he placed photographs, family records, important documents, savings bonds, and the journal itself, a record of the truth. Then he sealed it beneath the foundation. One entry made Aria's throat tighten. If they erase my name from the town records, they cannot erase what I built. If they take my position, they cannot take the truth. If they take everything else, they cannot take what is buried beneath this tower. The next entry was written from a motel hundreds of miles away. Walter, Dorothy, and young Nora had left Red Hollow. They were gone. Exiles from the town he had helped build. The journal described Dorothy's worsening illness, money problems, odd jobs, long drives, cheap apartments, starting over, again and again. The confidence from the earlier pages slowly disappeared. Not completely, but enough for Aria to notice. Near sunset, she reached the final entry from that period. Walter's handwriting looked exhausted. The ink had faded slightly, but the message remained clear. Someday, I'll come back. Someday I'll reclaim what was taken. Someday I'll stand beneath that tower again. Aria stared at the sentence. Then she slowly turned the page. Blank. The next page was blank, too. Several more followed. The journal appeared finished, but something caught her attention. The bundle, tied with the faded blue ribbon, still sat unopened beside her. She had been so focused on the journal that she had almost forgotten it existed. Carefully, she picked it up. The papers felt heavier than they should. Older. Important. Scout lifted his head, as if sensing her curiosity. Aria untied the ribbon. The first document unfolded in her hands. Her eyes widened immediately, because the papers weren't letters. They were financial certificates, savings bonds, dozens of years old. And judging by the dates printed across the top, Walter Holloway had been buying them for a very long time. What Aria didn't know yet was that those forgotten pieces of paper were about to change her life almost as much as the journal itself. Aria spent the next hour sitting on the foundation, surrounded by documents. The afternoon sun drifted across the ruins while Scout lay nearby with his head resting on his paws. The savings bonds were arranged in neat stacks. Walter had organized them carefully. Each certificate had been preserved inside protective paper sleeves. Each carried a date: 1956, 1957, 1958, 1959, 1960. Year after year. Bond after bond. Small amounts at first. $50, $100, sometimes $200. Nothing that suggested wealth. Just a man quietly saving whatever he could. Aria counted 16 bonds in total. She had no idea what they were worth now. Maybe nothing. Maybe a few $1,000s. She honestly didn't know. But the fact that Walter had hidden them beneath the tower instead of cash told her they must have mattered. He had been planning for the future. For someone. Maybe for Nora. Maybe for a grandchild he hoped would someday find them. The thought made her chest tighten. She carefully returned everything to the box, except the journal. The journal stayed with her. That evening she carried it to Mercer Hardware and Supply. Evelyn Mercer looked up from the register. "You found something." It wasn't a question. Aria nodded. "You need to see this." For nearly an hour, she showed Evelyn the journal, photographs, and documents. Evelyn read quietly, sometimes shaking her head, sometimes stopping to reread a page. When she finally finished, she leaned back heavily. "I'll be damned." "What?" "My father talked about Walter Holloway." Aria blinked. "He did?" Evelyn nodded. "He used to say Walter built the best water system this county ever had." She tapped the journal. "But nobody ever knew what happened to him." Aria opened the book to one of the entries, mentioning Roland Blackwood. Evelyn read it carefully. Her expression darkened. "The Blackwoods again. You know them?" "Everybody knows them." She crossed her arms. "Roland Blackwood is long gone, but his grandson isn't." Aria looked up. "Grandson?" "Damien Blackwood." The name meant nothing to her. Evelyn continued. "He owns Blackwood Development. Biggest development company in the county." Aria felt uneasy. "Does he know about this land?" Evelyn laughed without humor. "He knows about every piece of land in the county." The next morning, Aria got her answer. A black SUV rolled through the open gate just after breakfast. Scout was on his feet instantly. The dog moved beside Aria and emitted a low growl. The SUV stopped. A tall man stepped out. Mid-40s. Expensive boots. Expensive watch. Confident posture. The kind of confidence money often produced. He looked around the property. The cleared rubble. The exposed foundation. The growing piles of organized materials. Then his eyes settled on Aria. "You bought this parcel at the county auction?" His tone was polite, but only barely. "I did." The man nodded. Damien Blackwood. There it was. The grandson. Aria folded her arms. "What can I do for you?" Damien walked toward the foundation. "Actually, I came to discuss what you're doing with my property." Aria stared. "Your property?" "The parcel should never have been sold." "It was sold. Improperly." Scout growled louder. Damien glanced at the dog, then continued. "This site was included in a long-term development plan. Then why didn't anyone buy it?" A flicker of irritation crossed his face. "That's not the point." "It seems like the point." For a moment, Neither spoke. The wind rattled loose steel somewhere behind them. Finally, Damien sighed. I'm trying to avoid complications. What kind of complications? Legal ones. The words landed heavily. Damien reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card. Blackwood Development has already begun reviewing the sale. You mean challenging it? I mean reviewing it. Aria didn't take the card. Damien set it on a concrete block. The county may have made an error, or maybe they sold abandoned land nobody wanted. His jaw tightened. You should consider your options. I am. And? Aria looked around the property. The tower. The foundation. The place where Walter had hidden his life. Then she looked directly at Damien. I'm staying. For the first time, his expression hardened completely. The politeness vanished. That may become difficult. Scout stepped forward. The growl deepened. Damien took one look at the dog and decided not to move any closer. After a long silence, he nodded. I'll be in touch. Then he turned and walked back toward the SUV. The vehicle disappeared down Cedar Ridge Road. Dust settled slowly behind it. Aria stood motionless. Something had changed. Until now, the property had been nothing more than a place to survive. A forgotten lot. A ruined tower. Now she understood. Someone wanted it. Badly. And if Damien Blackwood was willing to threaten legal action over half an acre of rubble, there had to be more at stake than he was admitting. Scout stopped growling and nudged her hand. Aria scratched behind his ears. Then she looked down at Walter's journal. The man who built the water system had spent decades fighting the Blackwoods. Now, 60 years later, another Holloway was standing on the same land, facing another Blackwood. History, it seemed, wasn't finished yet. And before the week ended, Aria would receive proof that Damien intended to continue the fight his grandfather had started. 3 days after Damien Blackwood's visit, a certified letter arrived. Evelyn Mercer delivered it personally. The envelope looked official. Expensive. The kind of envelope designed to make people nervous before they even opened it. Aria stood beside the foundation, while Scout watched from nearby. She broke the seal. The letter was exactly what she expected. Blackwood Development was formally challenging the county auction. According to their attorneys, the former water tower parcel had been improperly classified as surplus property. The company intended to request a review before the county board. A hearing would be scheduled. Until then, Aria was advised not to make significant improvements to the land. Can they actually do this? She asked. Evelyn folded her arms. They can file paperwork. That wasn't my question. No. Evelyn smiled slightly. They don't automatically win because they hire expensive lawyers. That helped. A little, but not much. The uncertainty settled over Aria for the rest of the week. She kept working, kept clearing debris, kept reading Walter's journal. But every time she looked at the property, she wondered whether someone would eventually take it away. Again, just as they had taken it from Walter. Then another appointment arrived, one that felt even more important. Pioneer Trust Bank, the savings bonds. The branch manager had called after reviewing the documents. Aria drove into town using an old pickup Evelyn had loaned her. The bank manager, Beatrice Langford, greeted her personally. A serious woman in her 60s, with silver hair and reading glasses. She led Aria into a private office. The savings bonds were already spread across her desk. Beatrice adjusted her glasses. I reviewed all 16 bonds. Aria sat quietly. Her hands rested tightly together in her lap. Most people don't realize these old Series E bonds continue growing for decades. Are they worth anything? Beatrice smiled gently. Quite a bit, actually. Aria felt her heartbeat accelerate. The manager picked up a calculator. She reviewed several sheets of paper, double-checked figures, then looked directly at Aria. The total matured value is $52,341. Silence. Aria blinked. The number didn't register. Not immediately. How much? $52,341. The room seemed to tilt. For a moment, she genuinely wondered if she had heard incorrectly. Her entire life, she had been counting dollars, then quarters, then pennies. She had skipped meals because $7 felt expensive. She had slept in parking lots because motel rooms cost too much. She had never possessed more than a few $100s at one time. Now someone was calmly telling her she had inherited more than $50,000. Beatrice waited patiently. Finally, Aria whispered, "That's real? Very real." The manager slid the paperwork across the desk. It will take approximately 2 weeks to complete verification and redemption procedures. Aria stared at the documents. Walter. Every bond. Every dollar. Every sacrifice. He had saved this money, one piece at a time. Not for himself. For whoever came after him. For family. For hope. For a future. The realization nearly broke her. When she finally left the bank, she sat in Evelyn's truck for almost 15 minutes. Then she cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Years of fear. Years of uncertainty. Years of surviving. All of it seemed to pour out at once. For the first time in a very long time, the future felt possible. When she returned to the property, someone was waiting. An older man stood near the fence. Tall. Lean. White hair beneath a faded work cap. A metal toolbox rested beside his boots. Scout approached him cautiously. The dog sniffed his pant leg, then sat down. That was enough endorsement for Aria. "Can I help you?" she asked. The man smiled. "Name's Samuel Reed." He extended a hand. Aria shook it. "I live about half a mile east." He pointed toward a farmhouse visible through distant trees. "I've been watching you work." Aria laughed. "That sounds slightly concerning." Samuel chuckled. "Fair." He looked around the property. "You've been clearing this place every day for weeks." "I don't have much else going on." "Most people would have quit." "I've never been most people." The old carpenter nodded thoughtfully. "That's true." He opened the toolbox. Inside were measuring tapes, levels, squares, hammers, tools worn smooth by decades of use. "You planning to build anything?" Aria looked around. The foundation. The open space. The possibility. A small house, maybe. Know how? "Not really." Samuel smiled. "Good." Aria frowned. "Good?" "I hate teaching people who think they already know everything." Despite herself, she laughed. For the first time all day. Samuel pointed toward the foundation. "That concrete's still solid. You can tell from here?" "I've been building things for 45 years." He shrugged. "You learn to recognize good foundations." The words hit Aria unexpectedly. Good foundations. Walter had built one. The tower had collapsed. Time had passed. But the foundation remained. Samuel studied the property again, then looked back at her. "If you're serious about staying, I'll help." "Help?" "Build." Aria stared. "Why?" The old man looked toward the horizon. "My wife passed away 2 years ago." His voice softened. "I've built enough birdhouses to last every bird in Montana." A sad smile crossed his face. "I figure maybe it's time I build something that matters again." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind moved through the grass. Scout stretched lazily nearby. Then Aria extended her hand. Samuel shook it. "When do we start?" she asked. The old carpenter grinned. "Tomorrow morning." As the sun dipped lower over Red Hollow, Aria looked at the property differently. The legal challenge still existed. The uncertainty still existed. But now, so did something else. Hope. For the first time since arriving in town, she wasn't simply surviving. She was beginning to imagine what staying might actually look like. And somewhere inside Walter Holloway's journal, another secret was still waiting to be discovered. The next few weeks passed faster than Aria expected. Every morning, Samuel Reed arrived shortly after sunrise. Every morning, Scout greeted him at the gate, and every morning, the old carpenter found something new to teach. How to read measurements correctly. How to square a corner. How to recognize warped lumber before using it. How to swing a hammer without bruising every finger on her hand. By the end of October, the outline of a small house had begun to emerge on the north side of the foundation. Nothing fancy. One room. A sleeping loft. A wood stove. A future. For the first time since she had arrived in Red Hollow, Aria could picture herself living somewhere permanent. Yet despite the progress, she kept returning to Walter's journal. Something bothered her. The ending. It felt incomplete. The story simply stopped. Walter left Red Hollow. Moved away. Promised to return someday. Then the entries ended. It didn't feel right. One cold evening, after Samuel had gone home, Aria sat beside a small campfire near the foundation. Scout slept next to her. The journal rested open in her lap. She began flipping through the final pages again. Blank, blank, blank. Dozens of empty pages. Then something caught her attention. The thickness felt uneven, almost as if the back portion contained more writing than she remembered. Curious, she turned the book upside down, starting from the rear cover. Her breath caught. There was writing. Not in the middle, not at the front. Near the back, dozens of pages. Hidden because she had never thought to read from the opposite direction. Aria sat upright immediately. The handwriting was different, older, less steady. Walter's hand had changed over the years. The first hidden entry was dated November 4th, 1997. Aria stared at the date. 34 years after the last entry she had read, she began reading. I have not written in this journal for decades. Dorothy is gone. She died in 1970. Cancer finally took what Red Hollow could not. Aria swallowed hard. The entry continued. Walter described years of loneliness, years of small jobs, years spent moving from town to town. He wrote about growing older, about his failing health, about regrets. Then came Nora, Aria's mother. The entries became more personal, more painful. Nora left home at 17. She blamed me for everything. For leaving Red Hollow, for losing our home, for Dorothy's sadness, for all of it. She packed a bag and disappeared before sunrise. I spent years looking for her. Aria felt her chest tighten. She turned the page. Walter described hiring investigators, following rumors, tracking old addresses, searching through records, always arriving too late. Nora never stayed anywhere for long. Every lead vanished. Every trail ended. Eventually, he stopped looking. Not because he wanted to, because he no longer had the money or strength to continue. The loneliness on the page was almost unbearable. Aria kept reading. Years passed. Walter grew older. Health problems appeared. Heart disease, medication, hospital visits. Then one entry changed everything. June 2nd, 2000. A social worker from Ohio called today. Her name is Angela Whitmore. She informed me that Nora died in a car accident earlier this year. Aria froze. Her hands tightened around the journal. She already knew her mother had died. But reading Walter's reaction made it feel new again. Fresh. Raw. The next line hit even harder. Angela informed me that Nora had a daughter. Her name is Aria. She is 4 years old. Aria stopped breathing. For several seconds, she simply stared at the page. Walter knew. He had known she existed 25 years ago. Long before she discovered the tower. Long before she discovered him. Her eyes blurred. She blinked rapidly and continued reading. I asked if I could take her. I told Angela I would do whatever was necessary. I am 81 years old. I have a bad heart. I live in a small apartment. But she is family. The next entry was written 2 weeks later. The state denied my request. They determined I am too old to care for a child. Aria's throat tightened. Walter wrote several pages describing the rejection, the interviews, the paperwork, the evaluations, the final decision. Number. The state placed her in foster care. I told them she belonged with family. They said family was not enough. A tear landed on the journal page. Aria quickly wiped it away. All her life she had believed nobody came for her. Nobody wanted her. Nobody fought for her. That belief had followed her through every foster home, every shelter, every lonely night. And now she discovered it wasn't true. An 81-year-old man had tried. He had fought. He had begged. He had failed. But he had tried. Scout lifted his head and nudged her hand. Aria scratched behind his ears without looking away from the journal. The later entries were shorter. Walter wrote about calling social workers, requesting updates, sending letters, sending photographs, sending gifts. Most were never acknowledged. He never knew whether they reached her. The final entries became increasingly rare. Years passed between them. The handwriting deteriorated. The ink faded. Yet one thing remained unchanged. He never stopped mentioning Aria, never stopped wondering, never stopped hoping. Then she reached the final written section, the very last entry, dated September 2004. Walter wrote only a few paragraphs, but every word felt important. Tomorrow, I am returning to Red Hollow. The tower may still be standing. It may not, but the chamber remains. I have one final thing to place inside, a letter. If Aria ever finds it, she will know the truth. She will know I tried. Aria's heart pounded. The sealed envelope, the one still sitting inside the wooden box, the one she had refused to open. For weeks she had avoided it, waiting, preparing herself. Now she understood why. The letter wasn't simply a document. It was Walter's final message, his last chance to speak. And suddenly Aria knew she was ready. Slowly, she closed the journal. The campfire crackled softly beside her. Scout watched quietly. The sealed envelope rested inside the box only a few feet away. For the first time since discovering the chamber, Aria reached for it. Tomorrow, she would finally open it and discover what Walter Holloway had spent decades trying to tell her. The next morning arrived cold and clear. Frost clung to the grass around the old water tower foundation. The unfinished frame of Aria's future home cast long shadows across the property. Scout followed her as she carried the wooden box to a section of concrete warmed by the rising sun. For several minutes, she simply sat there. The sealed envelope rested in her hands. 20 years. Walter Holloway had written this letter 20 years ago, and somehow it had survived. The paper was yellowed, the edges slightly brittle, yet the seal remained intact, waiting, just as Walter intended. Aria took a deep breath, then carefully broke the seal. Inside were 2 folded pages. The handwriting matched the later entries in the journal. Older, less steady, but unmistakably Walter's. She unfolded the pages and began reading. To whoever carries the Holloway name forward, if you are reading this, then you found the chamber. That means you found your way back here, back to Red Hollow, back to the tower, back to the place where I did the best work of my life. Aria blinked away tears and continued. My name is Walter Holloway. I served as water commissioner from 1955 until 1961. I designed the water system that supplied this town. I helped build the tower standing above this chamber. If it still stands. If it does not, then perhaps the foundation survived. A good foundation usually does. Aria glanced around at the concrete beneath her. Even now, decades later, Walter had been right. The tower had fallen. The foundation remained. She continued reading. The town remembers many things incorrectly. People forget. Records disappear. Stories change. But the truth remains the truth. I loved this town. I loved my wife, Dorothy. I loved my daughter, Nora. And if you are Aria, I want you to know I loved you too. The words hit like a physical blow. Aria stopped. Her vision blurred instantly. She pressed a hand against her mouth, then forced herself to continue. I learned about you when you were 4 years old. I tried to bring you home. I attended hearings, filled out paperwork, wrote letters, made phone calls. I drove to government offices I could barely afford to reach. The state told me I was too old, too sick, too poor. Maybe they were right. Maybe they were wrong. But I want you to know, I tried. Every week, for more than a year, I never stopped wanting you. Tears slid down Aria's cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. For most of her life, she had carried a silent wound, the belief that nobody had come, nobody had cared, nobody had wanted her. Now she knew that belief had been wrong. Walter had wanted her, desperately. The letter continued. If you are not Aria, that is all right. If you carry the Holloway name, then you are family. And if you found this chamber, then you cared enough to look. That is enough. Inside this box are the things I have left to give. The bonds, the photographs, the journal, the land. They belong to you. Use them wisely. Build something. Stay. Make your life larger than your disappointments. Those words made Aria pause. Build something. Stay. The same message that had echoed throughout Walter's life. The same message he wanted passed forward. The final paragraph was shorter, more personal, more fragile. Tomorrow I am driving back to Red Hollow. I need to place this letter in the chamber and seal it. My heart is not strong anymore, but some journeys matter, regardless of the risk. If you are reading this, then I made it far enough. And that is enough too. Walter Holloway. September 2004. The letter ended there. Aria sat motionless. The morning sun rose higher. Scout rested his head against her leg, and for a long time she simply stared at the signature. He made it far enough. The words repeated in her mind. But did he? The question lingered. Walter had written the letter, placed it in the chamber, resealed everything. Yet what happened afterward? The journal never said. The letter never said. Only one way remained to find out. Later that afternoon, Aria drove into town. Evelyn met her outside the hardware store. You look like you've been crying. I have. Good reason? The best one? And the worst one. Evelyn studied her for a moment, then nodded. That sounds serious. It is. Aria explained the letter. Everything. Walter's attempts to find her. His final trip back to Red Hollow. His intention to reseal the chamber. By the time she finished, Evelyn's eyes were suspiciously bright. So he came back. Maybe. No. Evelyn shook her head firmly. He did come back. How do you know? Because the letter was in the box. The certainty in her voice surprised Aria. Evelyn grabbed her coat. Come on. Where? The library. An hour later, they sat before an aging microfilm machine inside Red Hollow Public Library. Dust floated through sunlight streaming from tall windows. The librarian helped them locate archived newspapers from 2004. They searched issue after issue. September, October, November. Then Evelyn suddenly pointed. There. Aria leaned forward. A small article appeared on the screen. Easy to miss. Just a few paragraphs. But the name was unmistakable. Henry had become Walter in adaptation. Need consistency. Walter Holloway. Aria read carefully. An unidentified man was found deceased inside his pickup truck, approximately 40 miles west of Red Hollow. The cause of death was determined to be cardiac arrest. Vehicle registration identified the driver as Walter R. Holloway of Billings, Montana. No next of kin could be located. Aria's chest tightened. 40 miles. Walter had made it back. He had reached Red Hollow. He had reopened the chamber, placed the letter inside, resealed it, completed his final mission, then started driving home and died 40 miles away. He did it, Aria whispered. Evelyn placed a hand on her shoulder. Yes. He came all the way back. Yes. Aria looked down at the article. A man in his 80s, alone, driving hundreds of miles with a weak heart, just to leave a letter for a granddaughter he had never met. The realization shattered something inside her and healed something else. For years, she had wondered whether she belonged anywhere. Now she knew. Someone had spent decades trying to leave a path back to her, a path she had finally found. As the library clock ticked quietly overhead, Aria folded the newspaper copy and placed it beside Walter's letter. The county hearing was only days away now. Damian Blackwood wanted the land. His lawyers wanted the land. But sitting there in the library, surrounded by Walter's words, Aria understood something clearly. She wasn't fighting for a half acre of property anymore. She was fighting for a promise buried beneath a tower, a promise that had traveled across 60 years, and she intended to keep it. The county hearing took place on a cold Tuesday morning in November. Aria barely slept the night before. She lay awake inside the unfinished structure Samuel had helped her build, listening to the wind move through the exposed framing. Scout slept near the wood stove, occasionally lifting his head whenever she shifted position. By dawn, she finally gave up trying to rest. Instead, she gathered everything she might need. Walter's journal, the photographs, the savings bond documentation, the property deed, and the letter, especially the letter. Every piece of Walter's story now rested inside a worn leather folder, the same folder she carried into the county courthouse later that morning. The hearing room wasn't large. A long table sat at the front. 5 county board members occupied seats behind it. Rows of folding chairs filled the rest of the room. Aria stopped in the doorway. The room was already crowded, much more crowded than she expected. People from town had come. Evelyn sat near the front. Samuel sat beside her. The owner of the diner was there. Several customers from the hardware store. Even people Aria only recognized from passing them on Main Street. She hadn't invited any of them. Yet somehow, they had come anyway. Her throat tightened. Across the room sat Damian Blackwood. He wore a dark sport coat. Beside him sat 2 attorneys. Stacks of documents covered their table. The attorneys looked confident, prepared, professional. Aria felt very young, very ordinary, very alone. Then Samuel squeezed her shoulder. You belong here. She looked up. The old carpenter smiled. So walk in like it. A few minutes later, the hearing began. The board chairman called the meeting to order. Formal introductions followed. Then Damian's attorney stood. For nearly 20 minutes, he spoke. He discussed zoning classifications, commercial overlays, planning commissions, assessment reviews, development strategies, legal interpretations. Most of it sounded impressive. and deliberately complicated. According to the attorney, the former water tower property should never have been included in the county surplus auction. Therefore, the sale should be reversed. Ownership should return to county control. Aria listened quietly. The argument sounded polished, but something about it felt hollow, because nobody mentioned Walter. Nobody mentioned history. Nobody mentioned truth. When the attorney finally sat down, the chairman turned toward her. "Miss Holloway." Aria stood. Her hands shook slightly. She carried the folder to the podium. The room suddenly felt enormous. For a moment she couldn't speak. Then she remembered Walter, driving hundreds of miles at 85 years old, returning to Red Hollow one last time, and suddenly speaking didn't seem so difficult. "My name is Aria Holloway." The room became silent. "I'm 20 years old." She paused. "I bought lot 14 for $5 because I was homeless and needed somewhere to sleep." A few people shifted in their seats. Nobody interrupted. Aria continued. 3 weeks after buying the property, I discovered a hidden chamber beneath the water tower foundation. She opened the folder, removed a photograph, and held it up. "This is Walter Holloway." People leaned forward. "He built Red Hollow's water system." She set the photograph on the podium, then lifted the journal. This journal belonged to him. The board members exchanged glances. Aria told the story, not every detail, just the important ones. Walter building the water system. Walter creating the tower. Walter losing everything after fighting Roland Blackwood. Walter leaving town. Walter spending decades trying to return. The room remained silent. Even Damien's attorneys stopped taking notes. Then Aria held up the letter. Her voice trembled slightly. Not from fear, from emotion. "My grandfather wrote this letter shortly before he died." She opened it and read several passages aloud. The room listened. Every word, every sentence, every regret, every hope. When she reached the final line, her voice nearly broke. "Build something. Stay." Silence followed. Complete silence. Aria folded the letter carefully, then looked toward the board. "I'm not a developer." She swallowed. "I don't have investors." A faint smile appeared. "I definitely don't have lawyers." Several people chuckled softly. The tension eased, but only for a moment. "What I do have is a foundation." She pointed toward the documents. "A foundation my grandfather built." Then toward the audience. "And people who've helped me start building something on it." She took a breath. "I'm not asking for special treatment." Her eyes moved across the room. "I'm asking you not to take away the only place I've ever truly belonged." Then she stepped away from the podium. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Samuel Reed stood. The old carpenter adjusted his cap. "I've been building things for 45 years. His voice carried easily through the room. "And I've spent the last month helping Aria." He looked toward the board. "She's one of the hardest working people I've ever met." He pointed toward the window. "The structure rising on that foundation." A smile crossed his face. "That's real." He sat down. Then Evelyn stood. Her voice was calm, steady. "My father knew Walter Holloway." The room grew quiet again. "He always said Walter was the most honest man in this county." She looked directly toward Damien. "And I think this town owes the Holloway family a debt." No one interrupted. No one argued. One by one, others stood. The diner owner, the plumber who had offered future help, farmers, shop owners, neighbors, each shared a story, not about Walter. About Aria. About the girl who arrived with nothing, who cleared rubble by hand, who stayed when leaving would have been easier, who built instead of giving up. The board listened carefully. When the final speaker sat down, deliberations began. 12 long minutes passed. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved much. Aria held Walter's journal tightly. Finally, the board returned. The chairman adjusted her glasses. "Then, read the decision. The county board finds that the sale of Lot 14 was conducted according to all applicable procedures." Aria stopped breathing. "The challenge filed by Blackwood Development is denied." The room erupted. Applause. Cheers. Laughter. Relief. Scout barked once from outside the courthouse, as if he somehow knew. Aria closed her eyes. For just a second, the property was hers. The foundation was hers. Walter's promise was safe. When she opened her eyes again, she saw Damien Blackwood across the room. He wasn't angry. He wasn't arguing. He simply stood quietly beside his attorneys, watching, thinking. Then something unexpected happened. Damien nodded. Just once. A small gesture, almost imperceptible, yet somehow meaningful, as if he finally understood something his grandfather never had. The hearing was over, but as Aria left the courthouse surrounded by friends, she had no idea that one final surprise still waited for her back at the old water tower property. And that surprise would change the future of Red Hollow forever. When Aria returned to the water tower property that afternoon, she expected relief. She expected celebration. She expected maybe a quiet evening beside the foundation, with Scout asleep nearby. What she did not expect was a delivery truck. The flatbed sat just inside the gate. Several workers were unloading lumber. Not cheap lumber. Good lumber. Straight boards. Premium plywood. Roofing materials. Enough supplies to finish the house and begin something much larger. Aria hurried toward them. "Excuse me?" One of the workers looked up. "Miss Holloway?" "Yes." "Delivery for you." He handed her a clipboard. Aria stared at the paperwork. "Who ordered this?" The driver shrugged. "Already paid." "By who?" "No name listed." She looked down at the receipt. At the bottom sat a company logo, Blackwood Development. For a long moment, she simply stood there. The workers continued unloading materials. The truck eventually pulled away. Aria never saw Damien Blackwood. No explanation arrived. No note. No phone call. Nothing. Just lumber. Enough lumber to keep building. Samuel arrived 20 minutes later. He took one look at the delivery, then smiled. "Looks like somebody learned something at that hearing." Aria smiled too. Maybe he had. Winter arrived early in Red Hollow. Snow covered the fields. Ice coated Cedar Ridge Road. But construction continued, day by day, week by week. The little house grew. Walls, roof, windows, insulation, a wood stove, plumbing, electricity. Every piece represented effort. Every nail represented progress. By February, Aria finally slept indoors. The first night felt strange, almost unreal. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling she had helped build. Scout occupied a bed near the stove. The room smelled like fresh lumber and paint. It was small, very small, yet it felt enormous, because it belonged to her. For the first time since losing Mabel, Aria had a home. Spring arrived 3 months later. With spring came another project, the workshop. The idea had grown slowly. First from Walter's journal, then from Samuel, then from Evelyn. A place where people could learn, build, repair, create. A place dedicated to useful work. The old tower foundation became the perfect location. Using reclaimed steel from the collapsed tower and donated materials from around town, construction began. The community showed up. Again and again. Farmers, carpenters, plumbers, electricians, people who simply wanted to help. By April, the workshop stood complete. Open on 3 sides, large workbenches, tool storage, training areas, space for classes. Nothing fancy. Everything practical, exactly the way Walter would have liked it. The first Saturday workshop attracted 6 people. The second attracted 10. The third attracted 15. Samuel taught carpentry. Evelyn taught basic repairs. Local tradesmen volunteered whenever they could. The workshop became part of Red Hollow surprisingly fast, almost as if the town had been waiting for it. Meanwhile, Aria's own future continued taking shape. She enrolled in online structural engineering courses through the State University Extension program. Walter's journal had inspired her. His descriptions of construction, planning, infrastructure, the satisfaction of building something useful. She understood those feelings now, more than ever. Life settled into a rhythm. Work at the hardware store. Study. Workshop classes. Dinner with Samuel and Evelyn. Evenings on the porch with Scout. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't wealthy. It was enough. Then one afternoon in late April, something unexpected happened. A teenage girl appeared at the gate, thin, nervous, carrying a garbage bag filled with clothes. The sight hit Aria like a memory, because she recognized that look. The look of someone with nowhere left to go. "Can I help you?" Aria asked. The girl hesitated. "I saw the sign." "The workshop?" The girl nodded. "Do you teach people stuff here?" "We try." The girl looked around uncertainly. My name's Kira. I'm Aria. Silence lingered. Then Aria noticed how tightly Kira gripped the garbage bag, the same way she'd once held her own duffel bag, like everything important in life fit inside it. Are you hungry? Aria asked. Kira hesitated, then nodded. That afternoon they shared sandwiches at one of the workshop benches. They talked. Not much. Just enough. Foster care. Aging out. Temporary shelters. Too many moves. Too many disappointments. The familiar story. By evening, Aria made a decision. You can stay here. Kira blinked. What? The spare room. You don't even know me. Aria smiled softly. I know enough. Tears immediately filled the girl's eyes. And in that moment, Aria understood something. The workshop wasn't the legacy. The house wasn't the legacy. Even the land wasn't the legacy. The real legacy was what happened next. Passing hope forward, just like Walter had done. Months later, another visitor arrived. Damien Blackwood. This time, he wasn't alone. Beside him stood an 8-year-old girl holding a birdhouse kit. My daughter Sophie, he said. Sophie waved. Samuel pointed toward an empty workbench. Birdhouse class starts in 5 minutes. The little girl hurried off excitedly. Damien remained behind. Awkward, uncomfortable. Finally, he looked at Aria. I'm sorry. She already knew what he meant. The lawsuit, the history, the damage his family had caused, maybe even the things he personally hadn't done, but inherited anyway. Aria nodded. I know. Nothing else needed to be said. Some wounds didn't disappear, but they could heal. Slowly, one board at a time, one generation at a time. That evening, after everyone left, Aria sat on her porch. Scout rested beside her. The workshop stood quiet in the fading sunlight. Inside the house, Kira worked on homework at the kitchen table. Laughter drifted through the open window. Aria opened Walter's journal. The old leather cover had become soft from use. Carefully, she turned to the first page, the page where Walter had written his name. Walter Holloway, Water Commissioner. Red Hollow, 1955. For a moment, she simply stared at it. Then she picked up a pencil and wrote beneath it, Aria Holloway, Workshop, Red Hollow, 2025. She closed the journal. The stars were beginning to appear overhead. The same stars she had seen on her first night here. The night she arrived with $62, a duffel bag, and nowhere left to go. She thought about Walter, about Dorothy, about Nora, about Mabel, about Samuel, about Evelyn, about Scout, about all the people who had helped build this life. The tower had fallen. Time had passed. People had been forgotten. But the foundation remained. And because the foundation remained, something new had been built. A home. A workshop. A future. Scout sighed and pressed closer against her leg. Inside the house, Kira turned another page in her textbook. Tomorrow there would be classes, projects, repairs, coffee with Samuel, lunch at the hardware store, ordinary things, wonderful things. Aria looked out across the half-acre she had bought for $5. The place everyone else had called worthless. The place that had led her home. Home wasn't where you were born. Home wasn't where you started. Home was where you stopped running. And at last, Aria Holloway had stopped.